Here, gentlemen, continue. So let me clarify some things about the working groups and so forth, because that's sort of a recurring question. So on Friday, there are two different types of activities on offer. Nothing is compulsory, you come or you don't come, it's your choice. But there are two different types of activities. The one are called working groups. In the working groups, you will get a sheet of, I don't know, it's a bit more than an A4, they're already online available, with questions about the theory. Questions that are similar to the ones that you will get in the exam. So you get a specific problem and you have to translate it into state space representation. You get a tree and you have to show me how many nodes you have to traverse before you find the solution with breadth first search or depth first search and so forth. These kind of theoretical questions, you will have 2 hours with a TA in a group of 40 people, so it's relatively big, but still okay. 40 people, and you have the time to discuss those theoretical things in the working groups. You need to register for the working groups in order to make sure that we don't have one group with under 20 people and one with 3. But if you have to switch, it's not a disaster, I would say. The rooms are pretty big that we have. So register with the working groups. There are 6 working groups, A to E. Don't quote me on that. So, yes. And they are associated with specific times and rooms, and that's all to be found on Canvas. If you don't find the working groups, they are at the very, 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 very end of all the groups that you can register to. Also on the practical, there's no way of distinguishing between, of making 2 different entries. Yeah? Then there is the practical groups. And unfortunately, there are 9 of those. Let's start that. And I believe that you have all automatically be assigned to one of those practical groups. That is not really necessary and on purpose, but it might be quite good to, as a sort of indication for distributing the people over the rooms. For Friday, we've booked 3 practical rooms for you to work on individually from 9 to 11, from 11 to 1, and from 1 to 3. So there are 3 rooms at each of the time slots where you can work. And there will be 3 TAs distributed somewhere to which you can ask questions if you sort of run into problems with your coding. And I'm working on a scheduling system so that you can register if you have a question and you sort of enter a queue, and you will be called to the next TA who's free as soon as possible. So it's a sort of mixture between a practical session where someone is running around, but we try to do it efficiently so that you just register, you know, okay, and the next TA is available for me in 8 minutes, and then you will be called when the TA is available. But there will be no sort of structure or nothing taught extra. It's just an offer for you in these practical groups to have access to TAs and to work together and to communicate with your colleagues. Just that you are sure that you have some spaces. And I'm still working on the scheduling system. I'm trying to explain that tomorrow. Yeah? The third thing is these project groups, and there are groups between 3 and 4 people, so I've been tricked into answering this question differently than I expected it to give yesterday by friendly colleagues in the back. So we have groups of 3 and 4, and I will think of an extra task for the groups of 4. So they will get a small extra task to do. I really recommend you to work in groups of 3. It's easier, it's the most productive thing to work in groups of 3, but sometimes you're a good team working with 4 people, and then as an exception, I will allow it, and I will come up with a devilishly difficult extra task for you if you work with 4 people. Yeah? So, and you need to register with these groups, and I will open up the groups to 4 people. Then there was an, I think, quite interesting and for me as well, useful discussion in the break about the space complexity of depth first and breadth first. And there is an interesting thing if you look at the number of nodes that you need to expand in breadth first search. And that is the following. Look at it. If I just have a branching factor of 2, what happens? I just write down my numbers. Yeah. So that would be a tree of. Yeah. So these would be 16 nodes that I'm now have now written down. And basically, if you do breadth first search, you need to have all of those in your fringe. Is that clear? Yeah? So if you now look at the number of elements in this fringe, it is 2, 4, 6. It's 2 to the power of 3. So it's the branching factor times to the power of the depth that you've been looking for. So this is the number that I gave you for the, in the O notation, in the simplified notation of complexity, where you say, okay, this thing, all above, is relatively small. The true number of nodes that I have to explore is, of course, 1 plus 2 plus 4 plus. But in the exponential realm that we live in here, people often say that this is neglectably small. Yeah? So this is the important number, namely this layer of nodes that I have to represent in my fringe. And we're going to make use of this on Thursday when I tell you about my magic algorithm that solves the problems between depth first and breadth first. If you now do the same with the exploration in depth first, what happens is this. This is what I need to represent in my fringe. So that is basically 1 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2. So basically this is the depth times the branching factor plus 1, but this plus 1 we can forget. So this is now our complexity for the depth first search. Yeah? And that is basically because we don't have to take all this long list into memory. Yeah? So that is a nice intuitive way for me to look into why is the one exponential and why is the one linear. Or not exponential. Okay, now let's go back to the informed search. So now we have this case where we have the shortest line distance, or the B-line distance. We know something about the next state to explore. So if we start in Arad, then the next possible states would be Zerind, Sibiu, and Tamarice. Timisoara. Yes, Timisoara. Okay, if you look at Timisoara, we have 329 distance from Bucharest, Sibiu 253, and Zerind, that is 374. So we would, using the B-line heuristics, choose Sibiu 253 as the next node to explore. Then we would look at Fagaras and Rynniku-Viceus. Anyway. So that would be 193, or Fagaras is up here, 77. So we have clearly Fagaras with 77 as the shortest one. We would look at go to Fagaras. We only have one to explore, and that's Bucharest. So simply by looking at always the best possible, the closest one according to the beeline distance, we would find a relatively good way, cheap way to getting from Arad to Bucharest. It's not the shortest one, I can tell you. So my greedy strategy of always going to the one that's closest to Bucharest doesn't give me the optimal solution. It gives me one very, very quickly, or quickly at least. But basically the idea here is that I take my fringe, I order it according to the beeline distance, and I always take the one in my fringe that is closest to Bucharest, and I follow it up. Now there is this is then the sort of the drawing of it. Start with Arad. That is my initial state. Look at all the successors, and then the greedy best first one will be CBU. And now, if I expand CBU, then I could go back to Arad. By the way, I forgot that in my representation. I could go back to Oradea and so forth. But then I look up in my fringe, because these 6 are now my fringe. I look at the one which is the closest, is Fagaras. I expand Fagaras and I get to Bucharest. So now, this is what's called greedy best first search. I have a list where I order according to heuristics. I take the one that's best, and greedily means I always go to directly to the one that's closest to Bucharest according to beeline list. There is one special case of it, and that is called hill climbing. Hill climbing is a search algorithm which is very efficient. It's very often used as well. And basically the idea is that you do greedy best first search, and once you've chosen the best one in your fringe, you throw away the rest of the fringe. You just add the successors, and you throw away the rest of the fringe. So in this case, we had still these 2 nodes in the fringe, but with hill climbing, you just throw it away. If you are in CBU, you look at all the successors, but you take the best one and you forget everything else. So basically, you always still do a local search in the city that you are, and you check out what is the next state you can go to, and you never look back at some exploration you've done before. And this is obviously very, very, very efficient in terms of, because you only look at the local successes at each of the stages. It's very space efficient, because you always have only one layer of nodes in your fringe. But it has a big, big problem. And that is if you look at the space of a heuristic space, they are very often like this. And the solution, let's say this one would be here. So this is the perfect value where heuristics would be 0. And very often if you start somewhere, you go, this is where the name comes from. You climb a hill. And then when you find the top of the hill, you have nowhere to go anymore, because the only thing in your list, all the nodes that you can reach from this one node, from the hill, go down. They are worse. But they are not necessarily the solution. So hill climbing is very efficient in many cases, and it's the basic for many, many very, very interesting and good algorithms. But in itself, by itself, it can really lead you up the wrong hill, and then you sit on a hill without finding the solution. So if you use, for example, a very stupid heuristics, the length of the name heuristics, don't ever try to navigate through a country by this heuristics. It might well end up that this is the one that you would go first. You forget everything else, and then you can't go any further because this one is shorter, this one is shorter. You've reached the hill, and your algorithm stops. And you didn't find a solution. Yeah? I'm painting it now more negative than it is. In many cases, hill climbing is really very efficient, and in your first game engine, doing a hill climbing is a very good way to start, but it has the unpleasant property of not being complete. So, on Thursday, I want to deepen both the informed search and the uninformed search. So uninformed search, I want to give you an algorithm I really like because it combines the depth first and the advantages of depth first and breadth first search. And about heuristic search, I also want to give you the classic algorithm of A*, which is also overcoming the problems of not finding optimal solutions if you do just greedy best first search. But I also want you to start being able to understand the principles of your adversarial game playing to program with. So let's now move to the fact where we have the search, we have state spaces, but whenever you have a transition to go to another state, there might be someone else saying, yeah, but now I push you back to the other state, or I push you in a direction which you might not want, which is called an adversarial game. So we're moving up our pyramid in the game and in the decision making. Now there is a multi-agent, multiplayer game. So we have someone who sort of destroys our party. And they are very often studied in games. So the big advances in AI very often came with studies of games. So in the earlier days, that was checkers and so forth. And in the 90s, that was when I studied AI, or was done studying AI, there was the big story of Big Blue, the IBM computer beating Kasparov, the chess champion. And that was sort of, it made the top news. A computer won in chess in the 90s, I think it was. And obviously we have a similar thing 20 years later with a computer beating the Go champion. And we have something at the end of the month, we're having a Schnapsen program beating a human player. So that might not be the big advance in AI as the other two, but it's still something very interesting and very, I think, very smart. If we can write programs that beat us in relatively complicated games such as Schnapsen, okay, so I think that is an achievement if you manage to do that in the next 4 weeks. But why study games in the first place? So the nice thing about games is they are often very close to things that we have to do in real life. So they are proxies for real problems. And the advantage is that they often or always come in principle with very clearly defined rules. And they are explicitly stated. And they are really abstractions of these real problems in a way that we agree upon. So I give you the rules of the game of Schnapsen, and then we can play the game. So we don't have to sort of discuss the small prints anymore. It's all written down. It's very easy to compare. And you can apply to single game, competitive multi-agent environments. So games have always played an important role. It's also fun to do this. So we could have an abstract example for the Schnapsen project that you're going to do. But as you now have this interface, you can play against your own intelligent agent. I think that's kind of cool. And very often these games are really hard. And as I said, this was sort of my history moment. I'm not sure anybody can remember, or you're old enough to remember these days, but this was really, for me, was an enormous advance at the time. And you should all have noticed this one, where the computer beat the Go champion. Yeah.
I remember the Kasparov one, because Kasparov was really angry, and he said that the computer cheated.
Yes. So I think we're now smart enough to understand that good AI isn't always just cheating, but at the time it was really a huge problem. So chess is, we're going to look in chess in a minute. I think it's a field of 8 by 8, so you have 64 squares. and you have 16, each player has 16 figures. So you basically have a board, you start in your board position, and then the first player has not entirely 16, I think you start with the 8 pawns. You can do different choices, 60, maybe a bit more. Maybe you have 20 different moves you can make as a chess player. So basically, you can already graphically imagine what's going on. We start with our initial position. So here is the white ones, and here is the black ones. And then we have about 24 probably moves at the first iteration. And then our opponent starts playing. And our opponent has another 24. So we can represent chess as a state space problem. But now the question is, how do we search to a win position where is chessmate? Where sometimes in the middle, our opponent also has a saying on which state do we want to go. So it's a bit more complicated version of the state space. And as you can imagine, the search problem is relatively big. We have this complexity of, even if we do depth first search, we have enormous time complexity. And if you have a branching factor of 24, then you're basically looking at the depth, what was it, the definition was b to the power of 3. So if you have a 24 by looking ahead 4, you're already getting into really big trouble. Yes?
Yeah, I'm thinking just from some states you don't have a branching factor that is always the same, because of the state you are in, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is usually, if you look at the literature and if you look at the book, and also it's not on the slide, but if the reader, the B should be the average branching factor. So if you have a fixed branching factor, fine. But even in our Schnapsen example, it reduces. So the branching factor is 5 at the beginning, and then 4, 3, 2, 1. So you average or whatever. Yeah. So that is chess. In Go, you start out with, I think, a situation where you have 81 possibilities to put your stone. But I'm not a Go player, so I might be wrong here, but it's a lot.
19 square.
Yeah?
Square of
19 square. So then it's even far bigger. Yeah? So it's 19 square. It's, yeah. Oh yeah, it's 19 by 19. Yeah. So and that is just one level that you can put your stone on the board. So you can imagine that thinking ahead, searching for a winning position in a game that usually takes 50 stones or 100 stones, it can take probably loads of a long game. It's absolutely impossible to really look ahead and find a solution. In Schnapsen, the complexity is different because we have this uncertainty about which card do our opponent have. So what you have if you want to do really a systematic exploration of all the possibilities, you have to look at all the possible cards your opponent could have. And in Schnapsen, basically, we have the situation that I know 5 cards, and that there are, I have to recalculate this, but I think it is 2 to the power of 12 different possible ways that my opponent could have cards. So we have this even more enormous. We have a relatively restricted game because we only have 10 cards that can be played. So the maximum depth of our game is 10. But we have a search space that is so wide the branching factor with this uncertainty that we have. And that's why Schnapsen is an interesting example for applying an AI and an intelligent system. So what is the relation to the classical search that we've been talking about? In search, we didn't talk about an adversary at the moment. It's just a heuristic way of ordering our states in order to find an optimal solution. And now we need to come up with a strategy that tells us what should I do in case my opponent does his best possible move. So basically now I have to combine the search of the in my fringe, I have to take those nodes first where I believe my opponent can perform worse. Yeah, is it clear? So I have to choose the best possible position according to how bad my opponent can play. So the opponent plays as good as possible, but I want the one where he plays the worst. That's the one I want to enforce my adversary to play. That's the min-max. Yeah, we're getting to that now. That's the min-max algorithm that you have already more or less, I think, implemented in one of your bots, but you have to do it also in the first week in the practical. And there are then many evaluation functions, so how good is the game position, and so forth. And these strategies have been applied for many of the classical games, so for chess, checkers, Go, Othello, and so forth. The specific property of this game, this class of games, is that they are what's called, they have perfect information, so you always see the chessboard or the Go board and you know everything about the game. And it's deterministic, so if I make a move, I end up in one specific situation. That's not necessarily the case, so if you play backgammon, I make a move, but the move starts with throwing a dice. So I have a notion of uncertainty in it, a notion of chance. So this is the kind of games where you have a notion of chance, but perfect information. So that's backgammon, for example. You know exactly where the stones of your opponent are. This is what gets us in the situation of snapshot, where we have deterministic, so it's exactly, I know if I play this card, then this will happen, and my opponent can only play the cards that he has on his hand, or she has, but I don't have the information about it. So that's where Schnapsen is in this case. And then there are games where you have both. So you have an element of chance and you have an element of uncertainty. So in poker, for example, you get new cards and you don't know what, and you have to adapt your strategy according to the new cards. Yes?
Yeah, I don't quite get why there's no element of chance. You don't know what cards you're originally going to get. You don't know what cards you necessarily
You don't know, yeah, but the cards are on the table. There is no reshuffling of the cards. So once the game has started, there's nothing changing in the cards anymore. There's no reshuffling.
Isn't that the same with poker as well?
No, but that depends on the notion on the poker game. Sometimes you get new cards, and they are randomly chosen out of the stock.
And is it a new clear game?
I don't know that game. So that's just from the textbook, and I added Schnapsen. So if you know the game, check it out. Sorry,
Doesn't seem like a game before.
Apparently it is, or it was in the 90s when the book was, the first version of the book was written. So, okay. So now let's look at a simplified version of the game. And that is that we have two players and we call them Min and Max. Yeah, we've already heard the algorithm, so you will see where this is going. So there is a player Max, and Max tries to maximize the value in the game. Yeah.
Please ask the students in the back of the room to stop talking, because they're making it very difficult to pay attention.
Okay. So I don't hear. Thanks for pointing it out. Could you please? So it's not compulsory to come to the lectures. There's video lectures. So if you rather not come, don't come. But if you come, it's really important for your colleagues. And if we have quick things to comment or to discuss, then let's discuss them in class. Come up with your questions, let's do it together. But for the rest, let's try to really keep quiet in order to allow everybody to concentrate as much as possible. Yeah? Okay, thanks. So we have two players, we have Max and Min. Max tries to sort of maximize a score, and Min tries to achieve the opposite, namely minimizing the score. And in many cases, we can just say, okay, the winning is 1 and losing is 0, and Max tries to get to the 1, and Min tries to get to the 0. So that's a sort of the starting position. And we have now a representation of this game as a state search problem. It usually is Max starts first, but there are also games where Min starts first, so that's sort of more, it needs to be specified properly in all of the tasks. So we start with the initial position, and that is, for example, the chess position. And then we look at all the possible moves that a player can make, and that is, in the first instance, is now player max. What can max do in the first iteration? And then, basically, according to the rules of the game, you switch. So first it's max, then it's min, then it's max, then it's min. In Schnapsen, for example, this is not the case. So this is a simplified version of the game, because in here we say we iterate max and min to keep it simple. In Schnapsen, the person to continue the next move is the one who won the trick. Yeah? So it could be that always max starts when it wins all the tricks. But for the sake of simplicity of explaining the algorithm, in the first instance, we have the assumption that it's always max, min, iterating. Yeah? And of course, we need some notion of rules that tells us what are the legal moves from one state to another. So I can't start moving the king in chess, of course, because it's sort of built in the pawns and queen or whatever is on the other side. And I can't go back with the pawns and so forth. So the rules of the game tell me which are the legal moves to make from one state to another. And then I have terminal states. In Schnapsen, the terminal states are the ones where the 10 cards from each side have been played. In a way, chess has no clearly defined terminal states, only the ones where you have a winner. So chessmate is I think, the only, or maybe there are others where you can't move anymore. But there could also be situation states where you can move up and down and up and down and up and down, and you have sort of infinite state space. And then you can assign to each of the situations, each of the game states, you can assign a value. Namely, it's still ongoing, so you don't know, it's a 0. You have won the game, that is a 1, and you have lost the game, that's a -1. So that would assign to each of these states a value. So, I mean, in understanding the algorithm, starting with this min1, 0, or 1 and 0 is a good simplification. So here's the example. We have a tic-tac-toe, the simple one. You have an empty field, 3x3 array to start with, and Max starts and can put an X somewhere. And you have these 9 legal moves because Max can put the X wherever she wants to in the 3x3 grid. And then Max, min, of course, in the next round, can make a choice to put the 0 or the O or whatever it is to the 8 remaining states. So we start out with 9, then we have 8, then we have 7, we have the faculty complexity again, which is already quite big. So this is the different ways of playing this game. And at the end, we can evaluate situations where the game is either won by Max, so that one would be lost by Max, this one is a draw, and this one is won by Max. And that could be either at the end, so after playing all the 9, but you can also note this maybe earlier in the tree. It doesn't really matter. Yeah? So to each of the game nodes, we can assign these values. And obviously what we're now looking for is a strategy for Max, because Max is here Max, so we're starting with Max, to come up with a node with a value +1. And now there's the algorithm for doing that. Is the min-max algorithm that I want to show you today before we go home. And the same holds for Schnapsen. So we start out with our game. And I'm now in phase 2, because then we have the full information. Phase 2 is where both of you have 5 cards, both players have 5 cards, and it's known in principle which cards they are. Maybe you've forgotten as a human player, but you should, if you're a good player, you know what cards your opponent has. And once we have that, that's me, that's my opponent. I can play one of my cards, then comes Min, plays one of her cards. You have to be careful with this drawing, because I don't show the states, I don't show the transitions. So the states are the cards that are played and not the hands that people hold after because that becomes invisible. That's why I only show the transitions here. Yeah, is it clear? So if you start here with playing the ace, then the opponent has the 5 choices of playing the 10, and I've not expanded all of them, but obviously in principle you would build exactly the same kind of tree as we've just seen with the top. Yeah? That gives me a representation of the Schnapsen problem in the second part. Yeah?
With the states, when you play like the for example, you're forcing him to play the 10, because in the later half of the game he's forced to play the same suit if he has to.
Yeah, so thanks for that. That was uncertain a bit. Why is it only the 10? This is according to the rules of the game, because in the second half you have to play the color that's played out. So here, the rule of the game forces Min to play this card, because it has to play a spade. Is it spade? No, what is it?
Clubs.
Clubs. Yeah. So Min has to play clubs. That means he has only this one possibility to play the game. So as I said in the slide before, the transitions are determined by the rules of the game. And then now, based on these transitions, on this system, it's my choice of a strategy. Which of the moves that I can make here get me to the highest chance of winning somewhere down here in the Schnapsen game, of having more than 66 points, 66 or more. And now we have to come up with a search algorithm that, starting with this initial state, gets me to the winning position where I have 66 or more. And basically the algorithm is as follows. You remember that we have this situation where Max starts to move, we got to new states, then Min moves, and we come to some end nodes. And for each of the end nodes, I can give a utility value. So that would be min 1 plus 1, 1 plus 1 or 0. Yeah? And now the task is, can I find a strategy that tells me, if I start in the initial position, which path should I follow to get the biggest possible result? So I want to calculate a min-max value, an estimation of what the value can be, according to a choice of a certain node. So I will use this later for the ordering of my fringe. What is the highest value I can find for the nodes that I can explore? And if the nodes that I want to explore is a leaf node of my tree, then I just give it the utility value. So whenever I have this, there's nothing I can do with it anymore. I just have the utility value. But it becomes interesting when it's about evaluating a node somewhere before, for example, Min is going to make a move. Because then I have to assign this value, this min-max value of S, of the successor, of all the successors. And basically what you do is you choose the smallest value that you can enforce if you are, oh, there's a typo here. So if it is max playing, you choose the maximum value that you can enforce. And if you're min playing, so this should be a min node here, then you give the smallest value, because that is the strategy that your opponent will play. So here's the abstract example. So this is some game. We start out with this position, and in this case, Min starts, so Min will try to make the first move. And these are the utility values of the nodes that we can achieve. So basically, if I am in this node, I have nothing to choose. So it's only is the utility value that I can take. But in this case, it's now I'm a max player. And the max can choose the value 1 here by choosing this specific node over this one. So if I'm a max person, and I can make the choice here in this layer between these two nodes, then obviously I would choose this node. So basically, the left-hand side would be playing the ace, and the right-hand side would be playing the 9. And I know that with the ace, I win the game, and with the 9, I lose the game. Then I would, of course, play the ace, because I want to maximize my numbers. Yeah. So, but now that we are on one level, can look one level higher. So, for example, so if where did we have a? Yeah. So here there was nothing to choose, because whatever choice Max makes here, she will always lose. Okay. So now let's go one level back. That's now where it becomes interesting, because now we are at an exploration of a node of min. What would the min player choose between those two? What is the strategy my opponent will choose in order to play optimally in this situation? If we have, I don't know, 3 cards on the hand, which one will it choose? It will, of course, choose this one, because that is the one where the min player plays best. So min always tries to minimize the value, and Max always tries to maximize the value. So in the next layer, this one will be the best value that min can achieve by choosing the minimum. And this one is also the best value that min can achieve, because it can only go to this, it has only one choice of playing a card. Here, again, min has the choice only of choosing one, but it would have chosen it anyway, probably. Okay, so we go one step back, iteratively, to the level of Max now again. So Max can now choose between those values. So here, she can choose between the 0 and the 1. And of course, she will choose the 1 now. In this case, she will choose the 1. And in this case, she will also choose the 1. Yeah? So basically, on this next level, she always has the winning strategy for getting to this situation, actually. Yeah? So basically, the overall value, the min-max value of this game is 1, which means that there is a winning strategy for Max. And how is this strategy? So let's say we are in this situation. It doesn't matter what min plays. She will always lose. So suppose she chooses the middle one. Yeah? Then what is the move that Max will choose? Of course, it will choose this one. Yeah? And then min is forced to choose this one, and Max can choose this one again. Yeah? So we have basically backtracked from the utility states down here up to a strategy of the moves that Max should take in order to win the game. This situation can be expanded. So we have now a very simple example where you can have values 0 and 1. This can be expanded to more complex games, complex scores, and I'm going to talk about that tomorrow. So see you tomorrow. I think it's a different place. I think it's in our building, KC 137. Yeah? Okay, thanks for listening.